all across America and around the world. This is Veterans Radio. This is Veterans Radio.
Good day. I'm Jim Fausone. I'm the officer of the deck today here on Veterans Radio, and thanks for joining us. We've got some interesting stories for you. We always want to remind you you can find more about Veterans Radio at its Facebook site or at the web, veteransradio.org, where we're on the web 24/7. You can find a lot of our podcasts there as well. We post new ones every Tuesday, so you can get a new story, a new interview, something you didn't know before by going to veteransradio.org. And before we get started, we want to thank our sponsors. First up, we want to thank National Veteran Business Development Council, nvbdc.org. It was established to certify both service-disabled and veteran-owned businesses. You'll find out how they can help your business by going to nvbdc.org. We want to thank Legal Help for Veterans. Legal Help for Veterans fights for veterans' disability rights all across the nation. You can reach them at 800-693-4800 or on the web at legalhelpforveterans.com. And finally, PuroClean. PuroClean is the paramedics of property damage. It provides water damage remediation, flood water removal, fire and smoke damage remediation, mold removal, biohazard cleanup. It also has a focus on veteran franchisees. You can learn more about them by going to puroclean.com. We want to give you a little advance notice. We're going to have a Veterans Radio event on Sunday, September 28th, 2025. Radio on the River. We're doing a new location on Freedom River in Livingston County, Michigan. We want you to save the date. We're going to have veteran storytelling and guest speakers. We'll have raffle items, great local musicians and food. Also, uniquely, there's going to be an opportunity to fly in a UH-1 Huey from the Michigan Flight Museum. And maybe you can also win a free ride that way. But plan on supporting Veterans Radio either by buying tickets or sponsoring Radio on the River. Contact us at Dale@veteransradio.org or Jim@veteransradio.org to get more information, but we'd love to have you come out, and we'd certainly love to have you sponsor. We just want to remind you that Veterans Radio podcasts are available on all your favorite streaming platforms, including RSS.com, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube Podcasts, iHeartRadio, and Rees Across America Radio. So wherever you are, you can find us, whether it's on your mobile phone or your computer or your laptop, your tablet. But listen in to Veterans Radio Podcasts. We post something new every week, and you're going to find it informative. We want to welcome to Veterans Radio today Herm Breuer. Herm is an Army veteran. He's going to tell us a fascinating story about his involvement with getting the Medal of Honor awarded. Was really an upgrade of an award for Ken David, who he met down in Trumbull County, Ohio. So, Herm, welcome to Veterans Radio.
Thanks for having me, Jim.
Well, this is a great opportunity to peel the curtain back a little bit and find out what really goes on to get somebody awarded the Medal of Honor. And then, interestingly, hey, what's it like at the White House? So, sure. But let's start here. Tell us a little bit about your service.
Sure. So I'm an Army veteran. I was actually born during Vietnam, born July 28th, 1968. Ironically, the same day, one of my father's second cousins was killed in Vietnam. So I always had kind of this strange fascination with the war in Vietnam growing up. And so fast forward that to in school, I was going to join the Army, decided at the last minute to go to college instead. While I was in college, enlisted in the Pennsylvania Army National Guard. And while I was at boot camp, something happened called Operation Desert Shield. Unit that I was with at Fort Sill because I was an artilleryman at the time. All except for the National Guardsmen, those artillerymen in that cohort unit were destined to go to jump school and then 82nd Airborne Artillery. So they were headed straight to the desert from boot camp and jump school. So I volunteered in that first round, and they didn't call me up. Got out of the Guard in 1996, re-enlisted in the Guard after September 11th, and same field artillery unit. Got called up to become military police in Iraq. While I was in Iraq, I was tasked to be personal security for Commanding General Ham and his staff in Mosul, Iraq. And I was wounded by a roadside bomb on March 24th, 2004. Came home from the deployment in 2005. I was returned to duty wounded, and came home from Iraq in 2005. When I returned to the workforce and went to apply to the VA for benefits, I was sent to the county veteran office, and lo and behold, the county veteran service officer there at the time was wounded in Vietnam, and he and I developed a friendship and asked me to come and work in the office, and I did that, and I never looked back. So that started my life as a veteran advocate in
and you spent 19 years, I think I read,
Yep.
as a veteran service officer for Trumbull County.
That's right. Yep. And what an opportunity that is. You know, you meet people with all types of service, from, retired with 30 years of service all the way down to the ones who didn't quite fit the bill. So, but yeah, so was able to hear in my early years of being a county veteran service officer some fantastic World War II stories. I mean, from every type of service, some just great stories over the years. And one of the very first stories that I can share with you before we get into the story of Ken, because it kind of segues into that. I went to a nursing home in the area and spoke with some World War II, maybe a Korean War veteran splashed in there, but it was a room, just a small room, and there was maybe 10 or 15 individuals in the room. And one of the gentlemen that was standing, and he was in pretty good shape at the time. He was a POW in Germany, and I knew him and had a rapport with him. And I said, just off the top of my head, I said, did there happen to be any other POWs here in the room? And out of this small room, I didn't expect anybody to raise their hand. This little gentleman raised his hand in a wheelchair and said he was a Bataan Death March survivor. I really was shocked because I wasn't familiar with him, nor was the other POW that was in the room. So this individual and I started to talk, and we had a long talk and found out that he not only was he a Bataan Death March survivor, but he also escaped from his Japanese captors and lived in the jungles in the Philippines for an additional 4 years. And he was getting 10% disability from the VA, of course.
Oh boy, oh boy, oh boy.
And he said all he wanted to be able to do was to be able to get his depends from the VA, and he wasn't able to do that. I said, well, I think I can do a little bit more for you than that. And lo and behold, he was able to share with us his entire story. I utilized some of the contacts that I had from my time since I was awarded the Purple Heart by General Ham himself. I contacted the general's office. He was USAROR commander at the time. He put me in touch with his G3, and we were able to get a Bronze Star medal for this individual. Just based upon his service, not a lot of research was required. So at that same time, Ken David came in.
Before we get to Ken, because this is the crux to the story, but it's how you found yourself going, hey, I can help people with their medals and whatnot. And veteran service officers do that on an occasional basis. rarely do you bump into a POW with that kind of story, but it's also the reason why, and we're talking to Herm Breuer, it's the reason why, Ken, that or Herm here, that at Veterans Radio, we try to tell these stories. That gentleman's story went to the grave with him, but for his happening to raise his hand from his wheelchair and saying, yeah, I was kind of involved in it, escaped it in the jungle for 4 years. What a amazing story.
Jim, that story is definitely longer than Ken's story. I can tell you that, because that was an amazing story, really amazing.
We may come back and do that story.
I'll just tease you with one. Through the 4 years that he was there, and he documented everything when he came home in 1945, and the newspaper printed it. But one of the founders of modern day special forces was in the jungle at the time, and he was assembling the Americans that had scattered into the jungles, and these guys came across him. So
we're gonna catch Herm back. There's a great story here we're gonna tell, so we don't lose it to history.
Yeah.
But it's that experience and your involvement with the local Disabled American Veterans Post that sort of brought somebody to you who said, you got to listen to this Ken David guy's story.
Yep.
See what you think. Tell us how that happened.
Yeah. So, and I was familiar with Ken before, they brought the case into my office. He actually was working with my predecessor, was still there at the time. But really nobody had a lot of background in real roll up your sleeves medals and upgrades and things of that nature, because the nature of the county veteran service officer business is hyper focused on VA disability. We can dabble in some of those things. I can send off a request for records, I can do this and I can do that, but as far as actually a real responsibility, the county veteran service officer, technically that's not it's in their wheelhouse, but it's not in their wheelhouse. It's one of the things we're trying to work to change anyway. So that kind of was what precipitated someone to refer him to me, was that Bronze Star medal, because somebody saw that I went and did a little bit more than just the average person by making some contacts of people that I was networked with, just to see what was possible. So I knew that there were previous attempts, and I had heard, hey, you got the Distinguished Service Cross, second highest in recognition. And so Ken and another one of his compadres came in, and they kind of told me their story of, hey, we think it's not right that Ken didn't get the Medal of Honor, so on and so forth. And being in that veteran advocate role, there were plenty of people that would come to me with their stories about why they deserved more than what they got, and so forth. So, as an advocate, you've got to have a little bit of a degree of skepticism, but then also you've got to keep your ears open for the story. And so that's what I did. And I listened to the story and listened to the questions that they had, because I think, and I think Ken may have alluded to it, but the medic who was on the scene that day was originally awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor. And that was kind of what caused Ken and his buddies to have some questions as to how that happened, but Ken didn't. So that was really what was brought to me and kind of dumped on my desk. And so I went back through my original contacts through General Ham and said, hey, thanks for helping with the Bronze Star Medal. Let me give you a little background of this.
Thanks for picking up the phone. I got another one for you, and it's a lot harder.
Right. And that's exactly what they told me. They said, whatever the circumstances surrounding the Medic's Medal of Honor, you can never, do anything that would negatively impact the story of the medic. And I understood that. It's not that we're going to say, hey, this guy deserved it and that guy didn't. Because at that point, the medic had been deceased for 15 years. Unfortunately, took his own life, I believe, in 1993. So I had the conversations with them. Okay, what would it require? So on and so forth. Um, and the general, actually, the general that I was working with, his name was Larry Gottardi. So Larry was the USOR G3 at the time. So Larry actually forwarded my information, well, Ken's information through me to the Adjutant General of the Army at that time, which was General Pete Muschin. Um, so it went through General Muschin's office. They said, yeah, it sounds like there may be something here, and here is, what you'll need. And, so that was it's like about a 2.5 page list of documented evidence, statements, and so forth. Um, so I can tell you that what Ken had as far as evidence at that time, Ken had the daily staff journals, which was extremely helpful. It included, the medevac reports showing who was on which bird. He had the unit manning roster that showed everybody's unit line number. Um, so he had a lot of the the specific information about who, what, when, and where. Didn't have a lot that was going to fill in the blanks. Um, there were a ton of letters from people from the community and legislators about Ken's a nice guy and we think he needs the Medal of Honor. And
That
yeah,
just doesn't cut it. That's
it
that.
does.
People feel good doing that, but there is a very rigorous process here
Oh my
with
gosh.
specific evidence that's needed. And let's remember, this is activity that occurred in May of 1970 in Vietnam. And
Right.
what year is it now that you've picked this up and said, okay, let me see if I can help?
At this point, as I'm starting to get into it and peel the onion back, it's 2010. 2009 was like the first like email off to see if this was something I could look into.
So we're
Um,
we're we're 40 years later,
yeah.
and you need the his commanding officer to sign an affidavit. There's all kinds of that 2 page, uh, list they sent you is very specific about what you need and whether those guys are alive or not
Yep.
40 years later.
Yep. And that's the thing that is really interesting when you read literally he had this one of those like uh, Rubbermaid containers with all of the letters and oh, Ken's a nice guy, just like we're saying. And the really the thing is that when you would talk to anybody that would maybe put one of those letters together, or you talk, he deserves this, but who's gonna do that? Who's gonna do the work that's on that 2 page list? No, nobody's going to do that work for you. And there is no one in an agency that's required to put that together for you. The only people that were required to do that are your chain of command while you're still in uniform, right? So, and at this point, we are 40 years down the road. But just like you're talking about, yeah, if we go back through the chain of command, which I did, but if we have to go back through somebody's chain of command, if it's maybe 3 years after the fact, maybe you might be able to, Google some people and so forth. But we're talking about something that happened in 1970 where, the average age of the combat's foot soldier we know was 19. The average age of their first line leaders was probably less than 25. Those guys are now obviously going to be closer to 80 years old. And then when we get into, company commanders, battalion commanders, brigade commanders, those individuals at that point are going to be in their 90s and greater than that. So the ability to kind of track down a lot of that stuff, or to say who's going to do that, because I do that once a month when I sit in a veterans organization meeting and the guy in the very back row says, I think we should do this. And you think, well, that's interesting that you've got that great idea to do that. So I think you're volunteering to do that because
Isn't that
no,
always the case? Yeah, you need to okay, go beyond talk.
right?
Let's see action.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, and that was the case for Ken, was that there were plenty of people that said, "Oh, I'm going to put in a good word for you, and I'm going to do this," and that. that process there, because I jumped in 2009. There were people that started putting, nice letters together in like 1998. So that big Tupperware Rubbermaid container that he had letters from, Governor George Voinovich and Senator Mike DeWine, and so all of these letters are in there, and that's all well and good, but that's
And
not.
let me again put some time frame on this. This is 40 years later or more.
Mhm. Yep.
You're working on it from 2010 on.
Yep.
He doesn't get President Biden gives him the Medal of Honor award. The ceremony is January of 2025. It's 15 more years.
Yes.
How does a
Yep.
guy stay with it, Herm?
Yeah. So we started to put together some requests in maybe about 2012, just gathering evidence, trying to understand the process, um, looking for any avenue that I can. And what we found was that there was a really important document that was missing in Ken's file, and that was the original DA 638. And so the DA 638 is an Army request for an award. And the easiest way to explain this, because even since this has happened, that Ken did receive the upgrade, I still have people contacting me. Well, I think this is that, and there's no way that anyone can receive an upgraded medal unless you can understand what the circumstances were that got them the award that they got. That's the reason that the DA 638 is required in the Medal of Honor upgrade, because there's no way for them to look at the new DA 638 versus the old DA 638. So that was the showstopper for a long time for us. We went around and around. We tried contacts at the Richard Nixon Library in California. We tried contacts at the 101st Airborne Historian. We thought maybe it was a unit record that, maybe we were missing. Um, and those requests, keep in mind, you put in a request to an agency like that, you're talking, well, maybe you'll hear back in about 8 months.
And maybe they lost it, and certainly personnel has rotated.
Oh yes, yep, and that happened quite often. So we did put in some requests before we got the 638, and most of those requests would come back saying, "Thank you for your interest in seeking the Medal of Honor upgrade. However, you're missing this." So there, at one point in this process, and I think it's important to note that, of course, I've got a regular job too. So in this time period, I'm assisting veterans with a multitude of other things. So, but in 2016, I became a board member, an executive board member for this National Association of County Veteran Service Officers, which was now exposing me to more resources. Um, and through that, I started to travel more and more to Washington, D.C. And on one of my travels, and it was in early 2017, I went personally to the archives at College Park, Maryland, because this would be where unit records were kept. And this was really the key that opened the door. And I don't know if you've ever taken a trip to the archives at College Park, but it's very interesting. They only let in so many visitors at a time. You have to have a visitor's pass. Once you have the visitor's pass, they screen you to make sure that you don't have any telephones on you. You have no pens or anything that can destroy the documents that you're going to look at. And they give you a pencil and a blank index card. And they tell you which floor you might find the files on that you're looking for. And there are some files that are open to the public, much like a library. but then the majority of the files that are stored at College Park are archived, and you have to have an archivist. You have to tell them what it is. That's why you have the index card. This is what I'm looking for. They go back into their cubby hole and see what they can find. And so that's what I did, knowing that unit records from 101st could have possibly been stored there. And I asked them for all requests for awards from May of 1970 through January of 1971, just in the off chance that it was misfiled or something. Looking specifically, because my request, you had to tell them specifically what your request is for, and you had to have authorization for that release. And I was looking for Ken David's Distinguished Service Cross DA 638. And unfortunately, they came back and they said, no, they didn't have his original DA 638. So I said, okay. I thought about it for a minute before I told them thank you and turned around and left. And I said, is there a chance that you can tell me if you have the Medal of Honor packet for Kenneth Case? And they said, I can
That
tell
being
you.
the medic on the same day in the same firefight against, I think I read it's about 300 enemy fighters had zeroed in on Company D's position, which had 50 or 60 soldiers, and he was a medic for that.
Absolutely, yep. So, and they confirmed that they did, but they also confirmed that I didn't have a release for that pile of information. So I came back home and hat in hand and contacted our local representative's office. And our local representative, at the time it was Tim Ryan, but he was fortunate enough to have a defense fellow in his office in Washington. And if there's anybody out there that is in legislature, I would encourage you to have a defense fellow in your office in Washington because they speak a different language than other liaisons do. So the first defense fellow was a Harvard grad. He was I don't know, Navy rank lieutenant commander. And so he was able to kind of help me a little bit and help me to understand, okay, Herm, here's kind of what is being requested from the Army Awards branch. Let's go through and take a look at your evidence. And fortunately, those fellows are only assigned to those offices for a period of time. That individual left, and we wound up getting an Army officer, lieutenant colonel, who was really sharp and understood the metal process. And I understood the metal process a little bit from my time after I was wounded and came home, worked in the first sergeant's office a little bit, and had a little bit of experience in writing up, commendation medals and achievement medals and so forth. So I understood that it was a process and you had to follow that process. So my training as a county veteran service officer kind of came into play because now I was starting to understand, okay, dealing with the Department of Veterans Affairs, I understand it's a process. There are things they want to see. So for all those years of just saying, here it is, here's what we have, and submitting that and getting back those denials, I started to understand more and more and more that unless I hit every one of those bullets, they're not even going to look at this packet. And that's what was happening.
Particularly true at awards and DEC. I mean, they are very particular. And I want to back up because without some sort of congressional if you will, professional help, this wouldn't have been done. And again, we'll remind folks, this is a Congressional Medal of Honor, although awarded by the president. There are requirements about how soon after the action that you can be awarded it through command. So 40 some years later, you're going to need an act of Congress to open back up the time frame to allow Ken to get the award based on what the Army says and what the president says, correct?
Exactly. Yeah. So one of those bullets in there is you have to be able to prove that you are providing something new and material that could not have been known to the chain of command at the time. So now, and looking at the chain of command, so his platoon leader was killed instantly. His company commander was killed July 20th. So there were two big parts of his immediate chain of command that would have been aware of his DSC otherwise, but for being killed. So there would be no way that those individuals would know anything that is new because they're deceased, and we were able to kind of prove that. The new defense fellow now was able to get the Congressional Medal of Honor packet for Kenneth Case from the archives. We were able to take that packet then and line it up next to Ken's to determine what we were missing. We were able to determine his entire chain of command based on that packet because it showed every signature from the eyewitnesses on forward. One of the, some of the other items that were on that list. So I'll go through that with you. So the original.
Well, I'm gonna speed you up a little bit because otherwise we're gonna run out of time here.
Okay.
And again, all this work gets done, the stuff gets pulled together, gets submitted. How long between the submittal and if you will, the phone call? Because what typically happens is the Army starts making calls to, in this instance, Ken, saying, we want to ask you about this. And at some point, those phone calls change from just informational to something's coming. What are we talking time-wise? Because as I say, you worked on this for 15 years.
Yeah. So the final completed packet, I want to say it was 2019 that it was submitted. And from the time that the final packet was submitted, I had a face-to-face, Zoom call with the Adjutant General of the Army in 2020 with our congressional representative, and just to try and determine what the status was. It had been with them for over a year at that point. We were able to lock down that the board, which is comprised of a couple officers at the very front gate, the board was able to give it and I forget their language, but it's something like they didn't say no. Okay, so they didn't say no. They didn't say yes, but they didn't say no.
It's a partial win.
Right, which means it moves forward. So it moved to the Secretary of the Army's office sometime around, let's see, 2021. It moved to the Secretary of the Army's office. And as it was moving through the Secretary of the Army's office, I was trying to utilize all contacts that we could to try and figure out what was going on there. We didn't have a lot of communication back from 2021 until Secretary Austin notified us in August of 2023. I want to say it was August of 2023 that, yes, it was Secretary Austin signed it August 8th, 2023. And that told us then that it was moved to the White House. So once it moved to the White House, I tried to find contacts with them because at that point, it's cloaked in complete secrecy. The Pentagon, I was at least kind of able to kind of track down, okay, where's the packet now? Where's the packet now? As it dragged through, through the halls of the Pentagon and then through the halls of the White House, it was extremely frustrating because, that that's Ken's story is a story that's worthy of this upgrade. And now that it's being scrutinized by, top brass, top administrative officials. And once it got to the White House, and we knew it was at the White House in August of 2023. I believe that Ken received a phone call in the summer of 2024 from Army Awards Branch saying, "Hey, we're tracking this, and we want to ask you some questions," just as you had alluded to. Um, and then from that point, I believe it was Halloween that Ken got the call from the president that it was coming.
Now, I want to tell folks, listen to the interview with Ken David that we did here on Veterans Radio. We're talking to Herm Breuer, who is, in my terms, the Medal of Honor Sherpa for Ken David. He put the package with some other folks together, had to carry it up Mount Everest. It is, these guys are all humble about getting the Medal of Honor, and Ken's a very humble man. Worked in HVAC in Trumbull County, retired from there. And this is going to change his life, whether he realizes it in the summer of 2024 or not. And as I said, in January of 2025, before President Biden leaves office, he has Ken come in and they have the ceremony. So it takes a long time, even a long time get through the White House. But you were in the room. Tell us a little bit about being at the White House for this Medal of Honor ceremony from 40 years ago for a friend of yours locally there in Trumbull County.
Yeah. It's tough to put into words because they really, in my eyes, they are treated as royalty and justly so. And keep in mind that Ken's award was with 8 posthumous, I think it was 7 or 8 posthumous awards were done at the same time. And all of their families are there too. So the room is packed and you're hearing story after story. I mean, history that was not being told before is now being told. And it's so humbling to be able to be there and see this, and especially, with Ken. When I started in trying to help Ken, his parents were still with us. I think Ken mentioned to you before Sam Lanza. Sam was kind of a World War II veterans advocate, DAV, Mr. Veteran Service Organization, and Sam was kind of the one that was like, "Hey, you got to make sure he gets this. He deserves this." And and I told Sam then we were going to do whatever it took, and we were fortunate enough to be able to see that all the way through to the end. So the trip to the White House was so humbling to be able to see Ken up there getting the award. It really just kind of melted your heart.
Well, and it's a room at that point full of generals, and depending on who else is being awarded, admirals and more brass than you've ever seen before.
Yep.
The president's there. I mean, this is as close as we come to that type of ceremony. The British do it a lot better, but this is what we do. Give us a reaction of just sort of like what it was be like in the room.
Yeah. I mean, you could have heard you could have literally heard a pin drop, because there are brass, like you said, brass everywhere, and not just the brass that are up front, the generals that are up front. It essentially the halls are lined with like majors and colonels directing you where to go. So they really pulled out every stop. The Army band was playing as soon as you walked through the halls of the White House. We were able to then, after the ceremony was over, we were able to kind of socialize with some of the brass and the other families as well. Because some of these other families, there was the daughter of a Korean War veteran who was there, and actually their family was also from Ohio, and unfortunately, and he was not killed in action, and his service also, just like Ken's, just the story that is being told, and you just feel so happy for these families to be able to finally see that their loved one was recognized as well. So,
and maybe that's where we'll try to bring this to a conclusion. Thanks for staying on longer than I asked you to. And we're talking to Herm Breuer, who was a veteran county service officer for 19 years in Trumbull County. He's now in the private sector working as a consultant in this area. But he was the Sherpa for the Medal of Honor Upgrade Award for Ken David. Talk about why this is important to the larger community. I think that's what maybe people don't recognize as yeah, this is great for Ken and his family, but there's a larger community aspect to this, isn't there?
And I think that that's what really, when I look at the whole thing, just like you're saying, that, and having served in Iraq, and I know that there were people that I served with that, and there were people that I served with that probably deserved higher recognitions than they've received also. And that there are so many stories like this that will go untold, and that's unfortunate. But for anybody that thinks that, so and so received this medal and that's an injustice, that the only way for you to right that injustice is by you taking the action to go and make that happen for that individual. So it wasn't that, there was somebody who was being derelict in their duty, because that wasn't the case for Ken. What we were able to prove was that one, out of the chain of command, only one was still alive, and he was 97 years old in a nursing home in Texas.
Oh boy.
And that was General Benjamin Harrison. But so that was not to be confused with Fort Benjamin Harrison. I think he was a grandson of the guy who was named for Fort Benjamin Harrison. Anyway, but that's the whole thing, that there wasn't anybody that was derelict, and there are hundreds of thousands, maybe even more stories like this out there. But if you're going to really be serious about saying so-and-so deserves X, Y, and Z, and you feel passionate about it, well, then you better be prepared for an uphill battle and be prepared to roll up your sleeves, because it's going to require some effort. It's not just going to be somebody's going to go, oh, you're right, he deserves that. That's not how it works at all.
Yeah, in the larger community, I mean, this is, as I said, good for Ken, good for his local DAV, which supported him, good for Trumbull County that supported him, all of Ohio, for the Midwest. I mean, these awards recognize our neighbors, our friends, people, tradesmen that we work with, just regular guys who will never talk about their story.
Yep. But
this brings the story to life, doesn't it, Herm?
It really does. It really, and I can't emphasize what you just said enough, because a lot of times, and they'll all say, well, I was just doing my job, because that's clearly the way that they see it. But when you're able to kind of see that from like a 10,000-foot view and go, wait a minute, that was, he was on a part of a larger operation, and you can tell that story, because unfortunately sometimes the Sherpa can probably tell the story better than the recipient can recite the story.
Absolutely,
because
yes.
Knowing all of the other factors involved that came to put it all together. And that's what's really important, is that, yeah, when you see that injustice, be prepared to be able to tell that story and tell it effectively, so that way that injustice can get righted.
Well, we certainly appreciate the time, Herm Breuer, that you've spent with us today on Veterans Radio to tell us the story of Ken David's upgrade to the Medal of Honor. Again, these are the sort of stories you don't want to lose. You want them, if you will, digitized on the internet forever. And we hope in the future people will go listen to Ken's story with the interview we did with them, and certainly here with Herm Breuer. And you'll find articles about Ken if you use your basic search engines. Herm, thanks for the time that you gave us today.
Absolutely. My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And I want to thank everybody for listening to Veterans Radio today. I am Jim Fausone. It's been a pleasure to be your host. I'm a veterans disability lawyer at Legal Help for Veterans, and you can reach us at 800-693-4800, or legalhelpforveterans.com on the web. You can follow Veterans Radio on Facebook and listen to its podcasts and internet radio shows by visiting us at veteransradio.org. That's veteransradio.org. We again want to thank our national sponsors, the National Veterans Business Development Council, nvbdc.org. Legal Help for Veterans, a veterans disability law firm with a national practice before the VA, can help you on your claims and your appeals. It can be reached at legalhelpforveterans.com or 1-800-693-4800. And PuroClean, a leader in property emergency services. It's the paramedics of property damage, providing water damage remediation, flood water removal, fire and smoke damage remediation, mold and biohazard cleanups. You can reach them at puroclean.com or 800-775-7876. We also want to thank our local sponsors. This would include the Charles S. Kettles chapter of the Vietnam Veterans of America, that's chapter 310, VFW Graf O'Hara Post 423, the American Legion Irwin Preskin Post 46 in Ann Arbor as well, the VA Ann Arbor Healthcare System, and certainly the National Vietnam Veterans of America Association. You can be a sponsor by going to veteransradio.org, clicking on the About Us and our sponsors, and help us out. Keep this program alive for the 21 and 22 years. Keep us going for another 20. Thank you.